Hello. Hello there. I'm your humble Ronin, here with another live episode of Lounge Ronin, all things, everything. If you're new to the channel, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And on this episode, we will continue part 2 of listening into Whitney Webb's recent interview with Peter McCormick. So without further ado, let us get into it. Un momento, por favor. Oh, never mind. There it is. Okay. Let me just do a quick refresh.
At his house.
I know.
Openly admitted to try and cover it up. But I mean, Wexner, for his estates, hires people from Columbus PD, or at least did during that time, to be his private security at his developments like New Albany and places like that. So, and he's the most powerful man in Ohio, the richest man in Ohio by far. So, I mean, you want to be somebody in Ohio politics, you have to go through Wexner. I mean, even J.D. Vance had a fundraiser at his house.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was in the beginning of his career, before the team up with Peter Thiel.
Mm-hmm. You're not a fan of P.2, are you?
No, I'm not. One of the few in independent media that does not like him. We can get into that later.
Can we get into that now?
Sure, if you want.
Yeah. Why? I mean, look, I can probably guess.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons, but I guess let's start off here. So, I would argue that neoconservatives have very successfully rebranded, and I think Peter Thiel is a very important example of that. So Peter Thiel, as an example, Palantir has been in the news, right? He's a co-founder of that. So how was Palantir created? Well, there was this company that was being run, or not company, sorry, it was a government program after 9/11 called Total Information Awareness. It was housed within the Pentagon's DARPA office. And the man they chose to put in charge of that was John Poindexter, who was the highest ranking member of the Reagan administration to be indicted for his role in Iran-Contra, which, again, the continuity of government stuff is relevant here. So, eventually, it launches and whatever, but people are outraged by it because, as they rightly pointed out, it would eliminate constitutional protections of Americans' rights, specifically the right to privacy, among other things. It was a huge surveillance dragnet, and its goal wasn't just to, surveil everything. It was to predict crime before it happens, predict terror attacks before it happens. I mean, it's like Minority Report was basically the end goal of it. And so after all the pushback, they changed the name to Terrorist Information Awareness and try and rebrand. Oh, it's not total. We are still gonna surveil innocent Americans, but we're focusing on the terrorists. They did all this stuff to try and rebrand it, but Congress defunded it. But hidden in that bill, Congress allowed aspects of it to continue. And essentially, I argue in my work on Palantir that an effort was made to privatize large aspects of TIA as Palantir. Because when Alex Karp and Peter Thiel were setting it up, they went to John Poindexter through this guy named Richard Pearl, who was a long-standing neocon actor with very extensive ties also to the state of Israel. He was like caught in the 70s giving classified information to Israel's embassy and should have gone to jail and somehow did not. And had a lot of ties also to Netanyahu's first government. And Richard Pearl is the guy that connected Teal Carp to Poindexter, and they basically wanted to talk to Poindexter because they wanted to recreate total information awareness and saw him as the godfather of modern mass surveillance. And in doing so, they basically, Peter Thiel teams up with In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital firm. Alex Karp has said on record that the intended clients.
I don't know how many of you guys out there are familiar with the digital ID. That's something that they've been trying to push for quite a while now, and they were attempting to use the recent global health crisis that we experienced as a justification to push in that, digital ID. There's actually a really interesting movie on Netflix about this with the British actor Clive Owen. I cannot remember the name, but essentially it's a world where there's no secrecy. So essentially they were able to create a program where no matter where you go, no matter what you do, you're always being watched. And the film is essentially about an individual who somehow created a code that allowed them to be hidden. And they were committing a series of murders, and Clive Owen was tasked with uncovering the suspect, and it leads into this crazy dark conspiracy about mass surveillance and individual rights and personal security. I can't think of the name of it. You know what? I'm gonna look it up right now because I'm actually curious. Clive Owen Netflix film. Okay, here it is. Anon. Yeah, Anon. Let's go to. We're not gonna watch it, but I just want to see if I can pull up the synopsis real quick. Where is this? Okay, here it is. In a world without an anonymity or crime, a detective meets a woman who threatens their security. It's a really interesting film. You know what? Fuck it. Let's check out the trailer.
Last night when I was chasing her, that's where it starts. What I see changes. The stairs stretch. It's an optical illusion, which later disappears from my record. It doesn't end there. At this moment, I'm seeing a train at the platform. A train that isn't there. Placing a moving image in real time. Who can hack a human being? How do we stop this? To find a hacker, we hire one.
What can I do for you?
God was a blank slate, no digital footprint. She makes her living covering up secrets. She's a master editor who can erase the unwanted act in the record. Most of all, she erases herself. And now our clients are getting erased.
This level of anonymizing makes all crime possible. Anonymity is the enemy.
Someone is killing my customers, trying to make it look like it's me.
She's playing you.
I'm not safe. Matt, where are you?
We can't believe our eyes. system doesn't work.
All clear. Please proceed.
You can't stay anonymous. Delete everything.
Keeping my son's memory alive. What's wrong with her?
You can't look back.
So that's the film, and it really reminds me of living in this, global surveillance state where you have no anonymity, you have no secrets, you have no personal space, so to speak. And that's what I feel like when it comes to the digital ID, we're going to be heading towards that kind of world. Very similar to, 1984 in the sense. Have no anonymity. You have
Palantir from the beginning was the CIA. And, the CIA was their first client for their first 6 years as a company. Their top developers went to Langley, Virginia, which is CIA headquarters, every 2 weeks to show the CIA their product and have them tweak it to their liking. And during that period of time, one of the top people at the CIA that would have been involved in that is this guy named Alan Wade, who was also intimately involved with total information awareness. And if you look at how total information awareness was described, its privacy protections, it's exactly the same as the way Palantir sold their stuff later on. So there's an insane amount of overlap. And what's crazy here is that Alan Wade, a few years prior, had created a Homeland Security software program that was also pre-crime-esque and similar to what Palantir ended up doing. It was called Kiliad, and he teamed up with Christine Maxwell to do that.
I wonder what the Whitney Webb file in Palantir is like.
I'm sure it's long.
It's got a
They probably know I have a mold allergy and all sorts of stuff.
And they're like visiting you, having a conversation.
Well, I mean, that's their job, right?
Well, it's funny. So,
but it's about pre-crime. It's about predicting stuff before it happens, and that's what I think a lot of people miss about Palantir. Because a lot of people say about mass surveillance, well, I have nothing to hide. But it's not about if you're doing something wrong now or not. It's about an algorithm thinking if you will do something wrong in the future.
I think I would definitely be on that algorithm. I think you would be as well.
Well, the problem is that pre-crime has been inching along, and actually a lot of people in Epstein world, I mean, obviously Peter Thiel and Epstein had a relationship. More came out about this earlier this year, after, Thiel kind of tried to minimize his ties a few months earlier. But Peter Thiel's Founders Fund co-invested in this company with Epstein and Wexner and Ehud Barak called Carp. Earlier this year.
If you've ever seen the film, if you've ever seen, what was it, Winter Soldier. In that film, the whole premise was Nick Fury creating a surveillance system that ran on an algorithm that would predict crime and act on it. Very similar to like Minority Report. But this has always been like the goal of these governments is being able to predict crime, predict behavior, in essence, and then change and manipulate our behavior.
Carbine that basically had a pre-crime component to it, and Carbine has now colonized an insane amount of 911 emergency call services systems like throughout the U.S. and are the main company at the forefront. If this legislation in the U.S. is passed, it's called Next Generation or NG 911, where they're going to basically federalize and centralize all 911 emergency call systems. And then when you centralize it, you can just put one company in charge. They've changed the board a lot since the Epstein scandal because Ehud Barak was the chair and there were people on the board that were tied to Epstein, including a woman that he allegedly took to the UK to sort of soften up some US senators whose identity is still unknown before the Iraq war vote, but it's a story for another time. And, some other figures tied to Epstein were on the board, and it would formerly been created by veterans of Israeli intelligence. But now they only have one of the Israeli intelligence co-founders on the board. The others have left to do other things. One of them now works for Eric Prince, I believe. And, they've kind of gone their separate ways, and they've tried to rebrand as a more American-looking company, I guess. I think they added Trump's former head of DHS, Christy Nielsen, I think is her name, to the board, and they have Michael Chertoff, the former one of the early heads of DHS under Bush. Is there.
So it's like so everything and everyone is captured, and everything is corrupt. I mean,
I think that's kind of a simplification. I think not everything has always been like that. I think this particular group, once they got their hands on power, it's a faction. They've been consolidating control for a long time. And I think the advent of technology, big tech sort of taking over our lives, has really facilitated that. Because the whole conclusion to my book is that why would you take someone like Epstein down? You don't need people like him anymore to compromise people, because all of our lives are increasingly online. So if they want something on you, they can just harvest it off through, whether it's, Palantir, it ends up in your Palantir database. Basically, it's sucked up by the NSA or GCHQ or any of these other agencies. And you're profiled based on it. Or if there isn't incriminating stuff, they can plant incriminating stuff on your devices.
So you're screwed either way.
That's the world that we're going to be heading into now, with the more advanced these deep fakes and AI gets to, there actually was a case that happened last year, I think it was, or the year before last, between a PE teacher and a principal. And the PE teacher used AI to create a deep fake audio video of the principal saying horrible racist things about the PE coach. During the trial, it ended up becoming aware that the coach created the deep fake audio of the principal saying horrible things. I don't know if anyone's ever seen, there's this classic film with Sylvester Stallone and Kurt Russell. It's called Tango and Clash. And essentially in Tango and Clash, they're like the best cops in the city. One is a very smart, by the book, very, strict guy. The other one is loose and wild. And they get ambushed into a trap where there's a bunch of dead drug dealers. And they use audio, and they created a deep fake wiretap that made it sound as if Tango and Clash had murdered the drug dealers and stole the money for themselves, when it was in fact these other corrupt cops and officials. It's a really, really cool movie. But that movie came out in the 80s, and in that film, you already had the concept of using AI to manipulate people's voices to incriminate them. And, it's getting to the point now more and more with various incidents that happen in the news, violent crime, and the next thing you know, it's like the biggest talk of the story, and everyone's trying to grift off of it. The politicians are trying to grift off of it and all this type of stuff. And they will try to use certain incidents to push certain policies that actually strip away our rights and freedoms. And I will not be surprised if we run into a future where they're still abusing that and using these deep fake technologies to essentially manipulate people into either being blackmailed, changing policy, all those type of things, or even changing the way the masses react. I mean, what's going to happen when they use a deep fake video of a racial incident to fuel racial division in the country as a means to distract us from being able to actually see what they're trying to do? It's kind of like what's going on with Venezuela right now. At any moment we might invade Venezuela under the guise of drug cartels, when there is a long list of evidence and documents that prove that most of the drugs are coming out of Colombia and are funded by the CIA, but they're going to accuse Maduro of being a cartel leader so they can justify invading Venezuela and stripping it of all of its natural resources, such as lithium, since it's one of the largest deposits of lithium in the world. And they'll distract you with a white woman getting murdered, a trans shooting, and they'll push it as a guise of racial aggression or mental health issues. And it's like they use these events to distract us from being able to actually see the bigger picture. Shout out to Ray Anderson Cash. I'm not sure what you mean by that, but shout out. Thanks for listening. If everyone else there, please make sure to hit that like button, and let us get back to the show. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, and we're back.
If they want to screw you, I mean, sure. Yeah. And so it's much easier to consolidate power under those circumstances.
Do you think there are...
And they elevate people who are compromised to positions of power. How did a guy like Dennis Hastert become Speaker of the House of the United States when it was known that he was a pedophile? Years before getting to that position. Because they can hold it over his head the whole time.
Oh, Tango and Cash, not Tango and Clash. Thanks, man. I appreciate. Shout out to Paula for coming in. I'm really enjoying this conversation as well. Fantastic stuff. We're about to get into, that pedophilia stuff here, unfortunately, but, I love what Whitney Webb provides to us and makes it easy for all of us to digest it, take some time to reflect on it, and then make our own decisions.
Do you think there are a lot of Epsteins operating?
Because they can hold it over his head the whole time. Because they can hold it over someone like Epstein down. You don't need people like him anymore to compromise people, because all of our lives are increasingly online. So if they want something on you, they can just harvest it off through, whether it's, Palantir, it ends up in your Palantir database. Basically, it's sucked up by the NSA or GCHQ or any of these other agencies, and you're profiled based on it. Or if there isn't incriminating stuff, they can plant incriminating stuff on your devices.
So you're screwed either way.
If they want to screw you, I mean, sure, yeah. And so it's much easier to consolidate power under those circumstances.
Do you think there are...
And they elevate people who are compromised to positions of power. How did a guy like Dennis Hastert become Speaker of the House of the United States when it was known that he was a pedophile? Years before getting to that position.
How often in politics, and even in the military, and just in government in general, how often are we seeing people of power fail upwards? How can you become the Speaker of the House knowing when there is documented evidence of you being a pedophile and people are aware of it? That's a really freaky world that we are living in, especially in our own government. I'm not even talking about like the Epstein list or any of that kind of stuff, but how many government officials have been unwittingly compromised or willingly compromised, and they're still in positions of power despite the fact that what they did was horrendous. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole origins of the pedophilia and all of that kind of stuff. If that's something you guys want to talk about, we can talk about it, but I'm not going to get into it right now. But what I want to focus more on the fact is that how often is it? It's like Nancy Pelosi. Like, we know that she has been committing all sorts of financial crimes. I mean, look at her net worth. Look at Ilham Omar. Look at their net worth. Look at Lindsey Graham's net worth. Mitch McConnell. I mean, they're openly committing fraud at such a massive rate that they're either being allowed to do it because they have holds on someone else, or they have dirt on them, and as long as they look the other way, as long as they push for certain agendas, they'll allow them to do whatever they want to do in the guise of like intelligence gathering, right? So like, you'll willingly, they'll allow these people to continue to be corrupt as long as they're able to continue getting intelligence data from these corrupt officials. But then we don't talk about the other side of it, where the occult and ritualistic side of it is that these people engage in these horrendous practices again of abusing children because it fuels the power that gives them the strength to conduct all of these horrible corruption throughout the world. I know some people might, scoff and roll your eyes at me at saying that, but I mean, there's a reason why back in the early 17, 1800s, there was literally a political party in the United States called the Anti-Mason Party. Go and look that up for yourself. Go and look up the Anti-Mason Party and ask yourself why there was a party that was against the Masons and that type of behavior and conduct.
Because they can hold it over his head the whole time.
Do you think there are a lot of Epsteins operated?
Well, yeah, my whole book is about how Epstein was not an anomaly. I mentioned the example of Adnan Khashoggi, but then, I mentioned Robert Keith Gray, who Robert Maxwell hired when he came, to the U.S. And made his big entry into New York City. He was also involved in sex blackmail stuff. There was a page boy scandal he was related to in the 1980s, where I forget the guy's name. I think Larry Craig was the name of the main congressman or senator involved. And Craig denied all the charges, but then got caught in the early 2000s for soliciting, sex in a bathroom in an airport or something like that. But there's been a ton of these scandals over the years. And then you have figures like Roy Cohn, who I mentioned earlier, involved in sex blackmail activities as well. There's a lot of these figures.
Sex blackmail seems to become very useful.
Well, it is, because, this is one of those things that's a holdover from the mob that later gets absorbed by intelligence agencies because they see its utility.
So if we see someone rich, famous,
knowing knowing information, the sexual blackmail information, the CIA, that's intelligence to them. We want to gather intelligence on these people and then use it to our benefit for national security interests.
Which is all economic.
Well, more often than not, but it's it's obviously other things too. Just I think it depends on the circumstance, really.
It's so hard to get your head around it, Whitney.
Well, I've thought about. I understand that my books are like a lot of information, but the thing is, we're never going to get an affidavit from the CIA being like, yes, we did bad things. Like, we've known they've done bad things, in
For a long
various
time.
decades. It's been very documented, and they won't admit to bad things there in almost every one of those cases. So it's like you're not going to get that about Epstein or about anybody else, you know.
So why do you think Epstein became almost like the central figure for all of this corrupt global elite meta cartel?
Well, he's just a microcosm of it, really. But I think
Is it his own
he
perversion?
became too exposed, I think, especially after his first arrest. And as he described it, he became radioactive. But he had, before been able to move through all these different circles, with impunity, and was a well-respected guy in these elite circles, right? He was useful to a lot of people, mainly for money things, but also for, other more illegal things from, what we know about the case as it's developed. So I think since then, I don't know, he tried to rebrand as like a tech entrepreneur and all this stuff, but he was allegedly still cultivating important relationships. He was reportedly advising Tesla on how to take Tesla private. He claimed to be advising Treasury on the Department of Treasury on cryptocurrency. And
Now, if it's true that he was advising Tesla, just wait till people find out about that. Just wait till that becomes mainstream. That, like, what's his name? Elon Musk. That he may have been working with Epstein, and I'm not talking about it in terms of like sex trafficking or anything like that, but getting advice from Epstein, who at that time had already been a convicted pedophile. I mean, and you went on the attack on Donald Trump, saying that he was in the Epstein files. I'm just waiting for that to be let loose. I'm waiting for when they finally put that final nail in the coffin of Elon Musk. I'm waiting for it because it's coming. He's been hush hush, but just wait.
Anti-hacking efforts, all sorts of. He was still doing a lot of stuff between those arrests. It's just the public association was, no longer beneficial for a lot of powerful people.
But he was considered financially illiterate.
By who?
Well, I think Eric Weinstein came out and said he's a moron.
Yeah, that's interesting. Doesn't he work for Teal Capital? Well, Eric, I'm not super familiar with.
Be careful of the Weinstein brothers. That's all I'm going to say.
With Eric Weinstein's Epstein story, but as I understand it, he talks a lot more about his impressions of Epstein at the meeting as opposed to why he was going there. And I believe he ran a hedge fund at the time. So why would you be going to Epstein as a hedge fund guy? I don't know.
Well, it seems like everybody met with Epstein at one time.
Yeah, for financial stuff, but I do not believe that he was financially illiterate. He was very successful. He would not have been tapped in the 80s by people like Adnan Khashoggi and Douglas Leese if he was not savvy. He helped orchestrate one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history, Towers Financial, but his name got dropped from the case like 3 months in. So, I mean, how do you do that by being financially illiterate?
Well,
why would Leslie Wexner give you power of attorney over all of his affairs?
Well, that is also very weird, though.
But would he do that for someone who's financially illiterate? Because Epstein had several years between 1987 or 1985, depending on who you believe, when the introduction was made.
But why give it to him anyway?
Well, obviously, Wexner liked Epstein very much. I think there's no questions there. So there's this murder of Wexner's tax attorney.
Yeah.
And then not long after that, Epstein comes into Wexner's world and untangles his tangled finances, whatever that means. And Epstein, during that time, before then, between 1981 and 1985, described himself as a financial bounty hunter. He was hired to find money that had been stolen, and he hid away stolen money for powerful people. He played both sides. And someone who can effectively do that, he was hired by like very fancy, like aristocratic people for those purposes, admittedly. like a very aristocratic Spanish family being one of them, they would not just hire some financially illiterate idiot to do that kind of stuff for them. And Adnan Khashoggi was one of his clients too. He's not going to hire a financially illiterate guy to do that. I think that is it's bull, and it's part of this narrative that's been woven about Epstein, about how he was just charismatic and him being good at anything else was just a facade.
So it's a distraction.
Well, yeah, because by that narrative inherently means don't look any deeper into what Epstein was doing, in his early history, for example.
Well, let's talk about that.
Sure.
Is this the arms trafficking?
Yeah, among other things. So,
okay, can we go back further, just for people who don't understand? How did he become a thing? Because wasn't he?
No one really knows, but it all seems to have started with this backpacking trip to Europe in 1971, and this was when he was a college dropout. I think he went to Cooper Union, I think, for a few years, didn't finish, and then was started at NYU in 1971 through 74, but didn't get a degree, something like that. And somewhere in 1971, he went backpacking to Europe, and he was in the UK. And so in the UK, he became close friends with this famous cellist, Jacqueline Dupree, and reportedly he claimed through her got sort of an in with the royal family at that point. I don't really know if that's true, but he comes back from that backpacking trip and he's hanging out at Jimmy Goldsmith's house. And Jimmy Goldsmith is an interesting figure. If you are a fan of Adam Curtis documentaries, you may remember him from the Mayfair set. He is a currency speculator, or was. He was very close to Robert Maxwell, among other figures. He was a member of this very interesting nexus in Mayfair called the Claremont Club, which was sort of this elite gambling club that a lot of interesting figures were tied to, including figures with intelligence links, organized crime links, and sex blackmail links. So, for example, if you're familiar with the Profumo affair in UK politics, the nexus responsible for that, which brought down the government of Harold Macmillan, has its nexus at the Claremont Club. And Jimmy Goldsmith was a member of that, along with people that were also very close to Robert Maxwell, like Roland, or Tiny Roland, as he's remembered. And another well-known member is David Sterling, who basically started a lot of this movement, the private mercenary phenomena in Britain, among other things. So definitely a network of powerful people, and a lot of Epstein's early high society New York contacts. His earliest ones, a lot of them met him at Jimmy Goldsmith's mansion in New York. How were they connected?
So originally he's networking.
Yeah, but he's a college dropout. Something happens when he goes to Britain. We don't really know, but he gets connected with this crowd.
Do you have a suspicion?
It may have been through his daughter, Isabel Goldsmith. She's in the Black Book. It's hard to know. Also, Jacqueline Dupree was reportedly cultivated ties with sort of the New York Jewish community because she converted to Judaism in 1967. She was married, I think, to an Israeli musician, but she was close also to Itzhak Perlman, who's a famous New York musician. I think he's a violinist. I can't remember exactly what instruments he plays. Sorry. But he and Epstein had a pretty significant relationship also. But it's important to point out, when I say Epstein had a relationship with people, I'm not saying they had a sex blackmail relationship necessarily. Yeah. What we're trying to untangle here is the truth of who Epstein was and why was he taken down. Because I don't think he was taken down because in 2019, all of a sudden, the U.S. government became outraged about the sweetheart deal of 2007, 12 years after the fact, and then wanted to rectify some wrong. I think it was about something else. He pissed off somebody, or, something similar that befell Robert Maxwell, for example. But anyway.
Stop becoming useful, too much heat.
Something. I have some theories. We can get to those later. But going back to early Epstein, Yeah, so he's in this network with Jimmy Goldsmith, and he gets hired in 1974, which is the year he stops, also the year he stops going to university for any reason, um, and gets hired at the Dalton School, which is this elite New York private school, and he's hired by Donald Barr, who's William Barr's father. Donald Barr had worked at the OSS, and which is the precursor to the CIA, and then after that had been involved in all of these programs to identify gifted children when they were, high schoolers and things like that. And Epstein would have fallen in that category. We don't know if there was a connection there, but Epstein graduated high school like 2 years early. He was a math whiz.
It's interesting that she brings up gifted children, and it kind of makes you think about, whether it has to do with like MK Ultra or kids with psychic abilities, all that kind of fun jazz that the CIA has recently put out. What is it called when they're able to like mentally teleport themselves and view other places? I can't even think of the word right now, but this idea, it's funny how she'll just touch like just the surface of certain things, like gifted children and things like that, but she won't go down that rabbit hole. And I would assume it's because many other people out there have done that research and have done as deep of a dive as she has done, especially people who were in those programs who have later come out to talk about their experiences, maybe even try to get some congressional hearing about it. But it's funny because when you think about this whole idea of these gifted children, that even ties into trafficking of youth, because some of these kids, they end up getting trafficked. They end up getting taken from their families. Sometimes their families willingly give them away. I mean, that's one thing that we never really talk about, is the countless parents out there who willingly give their children up to be trafficked, to be experimented on, for whatever, simply for money or for power. I mean, look at all these, Hollywood kids, how many of their parents willingly put them into compromising, exploitative situations because they knew that it would gain their child more, acting opportunities, more career opportunities, which leads to more money, more power, more influence, all the glam and glitter. It's a sick world.
And also got a scholarship to go to Interlochen, where he would later return to offend, actually, which is this kind of elite music school for really talented kids. And I think he went there because he was good at the bassoon or something, but he was apparently really good at math, and could play a lot of different instruments, and was reportedly very talented. And he obviously caught people's attention for some reason.
Was it Bear Stearns from there?
Hmm? It was Bear Stearns from there. So, it depends on who you believe about who hired him, but it was Ace Greenberg at the end of the day, who became CEO or the head of Bear Stearns, I think, in 1978. But there's a lot of people, there's a lot of baton passing here for responsibility. And I think that's kind of common now that Epstein is kind of an infamous character, right?
Yeah.
So the sister, his allegedly it was the daughter of Ace Greenberg. She denies it. It was she says it was some kid at school, one of her friends another kid at school. Their dad was friendly with Greenberg and recommended Epstein to Greenberg. I don't know. There's all these different stories, but there's an agreement that it was Greenberg that brought him to Bear Stearns.
Okay.
It's a little complicated, sorry, but basically, Epstein joins Bear Stearns in 1976, and by 1980 he's like a limited partner. He has a very meteoric rise at the firm. Oh yeah. He was basically Greenberg's protege, and then he leaves in 1981. There's a lot of different stories there. But it seems like the most likely explanation is that there was this SEC investigation because the trade at the center of that investigation happens the day before Epstein resigns Bear Stearns. And the official story that he had been fined for not reporting something in the expense account appropriately doesn't really make sense with why he would like leave a job as a limited partner, netting him a lot of money for a fine that was relatively small. And then you have other Bear Stearns executives and Epstein himself say, "Oh, I wanted to strike out on my own and make my own business." At that point, there again a lot of conflicting information. But the SEC case revolves around the Bronfman family, insider trading involving Seagrams, and a lot of other people that are sort of in this network. One of the guys involved in that insider trading scandal later becomes a big part of Jimmy Goldsmith's corporate rating in the U.S. and his acquisition of this company called Crown Zellerback. Which is part of this. Well, I don't want to throw out too many names that confuses people. But Drexel, Burnham, Lambert, they're like the heart of a lot of the savings and loans and junk bond scandal, financial funny business going on in the 80s, and Epstein has a lot of ties to that crowd. And so Epstein appears to have been advised to leave Bear Stearns because of that investigation. I argue in the book it was probably to take heat off of Ace Greenberg, who had become CEO at that point. Epstein was his protege, and having him sort of go and take the fall for it made it a lot easier for them. But what's interesting about this too is that the lawyer for Bear Stearns up until a few weeks prior had been Bill Casey, who had just been tapped as Reagan's CIA director. So whoever Bill Casey left his whole legal portfolio to of all his long-time legal clients would have been the person to make that call. And then after he leaves, he becomes involved in this financial bounty hunting where he's hiding and finding money for powerful people in offshore shadow bank world. And 1981 is also where Casey brings in Khashoggi for Iran-Contra related purposes and all of that. And Khashoggi becomes Epstein's client. All sorts of things start to kick off.
The same names keep coming up over and over again. And sometimes not even just say it's the family.
Well, like I was saying earlier, we're not going to get a signed affidavit from like the CIA or any intelligence agency talking about Epstein, including Israel's. So what are we left with? Well, we have to look at what is ultimately, I guess circumstantial evidence, but you stack enough of it over the decades, you can show that something shady is definitely going on. And that's the reason my books are long and so detail oriented, is because that's all we really have in terms of open source intelligence to put all of this together. Right. And so that's what I tried to do. So it's allegedly somewhere in the span of 1983 and 1985.
So it's not long after.
Not long after, no. But remember, his mentors in the shady world of arms trafficking and all of that are Douglas Leese and Adnan Khashoggi, and they team up around this time. And Khashoggi in particular has relationships with Israeli intelligence, but it was actually a person who was known to have been working with Robert Maxwell and Israeli intelligence stuff, Ari Ben Menashe, that said that Epstein was brought before him by Maxwell, and Maxwell wanted him included in the stuff that they were doing for Israel, that stuff being, arms transfers. The other guy in the group was Nick Davies, who was the foreign editor for one of the publications that Maxwell owned at the time.
What year did Maxwell die? Was it 87?
91.
Was it 91?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because he feels like a successor to Maxwell.
In a lot of ways, yeah. So Maxwell was, I think he's misunderstood because a lot of him think of him as just a fraud and a grifter. And obviously he was those things. He engaged in a lot of illegal financial stuff. And the reason it wasn't exposed sooner is because he was very adept at keeping things afloat when they were insolvent. Right.
Yeah.
Moving money from here to there around. And I don't think his kids, Kean and Evan could keep up with that or do it the way he could do it. But Epstein definitely was, capable, I think. But Robert Maxwell was one of a series of deaths in 1991 that are tied to these intermixed scandals with Iran-Contra, one being Promise, in which Maxwell was also involved, and the other one being BCCI that we've brought up a few times. Yeah, I'm not sure where you want to go from here.
Well, so I kind of want to understand what Epstein was doing in that period then in the late 80s, early 90s, because obviously most of us aren't aware of him until...
There's a lot of overstacking
Yeah.
things. He's involved in a lot of pies. So his earliest stuff with arms trafficking was with Lease and apparently Khashoggi. And Lease had gone into this joint venture with Chinese weapons manufacturers, mainly the company Norinco. And they were sending a lot of weapons to Iran. So it was a parallel arms trafficking operation to Iran that was separate but related to Iran-Contra. And so that seems to be sort of his foray into it. And then obviously, you know, Khashoggi is doing Iran-Contra. He's doing stuff in savings and loans and all other sorts of arms deals all over the world. And Epstein gets involved with Wexner in this period. He gets involved with Steve Hoffenberg and the Tower Financial Ponzi in this period. And he's doing this financial bounty hunting stuff. And a lot of the characters, you know, that he gets involved with, and other characters that's not really talked about a lot, is Evangeline Gouletas. He ends up sharing an office with her for several years. And their attorney, the Gouletas family attorney, Alan Tesler, becomes involved with Leslie Wexner in this period. And he also is involved with the architect of the aforementioned Promise Software scandal, Earl Bryan, during this time. And so it all these people start to sort of meld into these same scandals in the 80s, and Epstein was absolutely sort of enmeshed in this crowd.
What do you think
during
drives
the 80s?
Is driving him at that time? Is it power and money? Is it just money? What drives all
I
these
think it's
people?
I think it depends on what kind of person you are.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty clear that Epstein was pervy. And when you're very powerful, you can get away with all sorts of stuff. And he was obviously sought after for his financial acumen, but I would say, you know, again, it's offshore banking stuff. It's shady banking stuff that he was really good at. That was actually what he was sort of tapped at Bear Stearns for. He started he initially started being like an assistant to someone on the floor of the stock exchange, and by the end of it was advising their wealthiest clients on matters relating to esoteric markets and the tax code. So
Hiding money.
Yeah. So I think, you know, it's pretty clear he was sought after, at least by these shady characters, for those purposes. Yeah.
When does the tap on the shoulder from Mossad come? What's the point where...
I mean, it seems like it's Robert Maxwell being sort of the earliest. But again, if you have, you know, Lease and Khashoggi in the mix, it's possible it could have come a little sooner. But again, it's hard to know. Hard to know. But I mean, he had ties... Oh, it's important to point out that the head of Amman, which is the Military Intelligence Directorate of Israel, at the time that Maxwell sort of pushes out Epstein, was Ehud Barak. And according to Ari Ben Menashe, Ehud Barak was one of the higher-ups that Robert Maxwell referenced as having approved Epstein before he introduced him to Epstein.
Huh.
But supposedly Ehud Barak says that he didn't meet Epstein until like the late 90s. But there's a lot of these cases where people say, no, I met him way later, and all of this that have turned out to like not be true. Like Bill Gates, for example, saying it was like 2011 was their first meeting.
That was bullshit.
Yeah.
Okay. It's because we go from him being a guy involved in financial things to maybe some arms deal to a guy who owns an island.
Yeah.
And a plane.
It's hard to know how that happened, but I think it's somewhere in the late 80s, because Robert Maxwell in the late 80s sort of plans his entry into New York from the UK. He decides he's like not liked very much in the UK at that point, and he talks about how when he goes to New York, people like love him and how he thought that was great. But that isn't like the only reason. One of the main motivators here is that he was picked by this Wall Street bank, Rothschild Inc. It was created by the Rothschild family because they felt like they had neglected Wall Street.
Okay.
And
here's a little fun fact for you guys. The Rothschilds, the way they got their money was through smuggling. They were smugglers. That's how they started out. Smuggling guns, drugs, supplies. That's how they got their bread and butter. Just a little fun fact for you guys. There's actually a really cool show called what's it called? Sharp? It's a time period show, but I can't remember the specifics about it. But it's got Sean Bean in it. Is it Sean Bean or Sean Ben? That British actor from Lord of the Rings. He plays the main character. But anyways, there's one episode where the British military works with one of the Rothschilds, and he dresses up like a woman in order to smuggle intelligence to the British because they were working for both sides. Very, very interesting stuff. And the fact that they were wearing dresses, the Rothschilds, in the show. Just a little fact for you guys.
And wanted to sort of reestablish their dominance in New York finance. That's how they described it to the New York Times. And so they focused on mergers and acquisitions initially to get their foothold. And so they picked Jimmy Goldsmith and Robert Maxwell to be sort of their corporate raiders from their UK banking interests that made the entry for Rothschild Inc. in mergers and acquisitions into the US. And so
if you're interested in learning about the banking cartels, there's a great book called The Patriot Report by Brian Sharp. I highly recommend you guys, if you're interested in learning about the banking side of everything that Whitney Webb is talking about, the Patriot Report by Brian Sharp is a really great book. It goes into how Wall Street was not only funding the Allies, but it was also funding the Nazis. It goes into how the UK government essentially funded and created the Nazis because they were funding Adolf Hitler. So if you're really interested in learning about that stuff, I highly recommend you check out the book The Patriot Report by Brian Sharp.
you have Jimmy Goldsmith do the Crown Zellerbach play that I mentioned earlier, and you have Maxwell take over Macmillan, among other things, as part of this push into the U.S. financial system, basically. So in the same period of time that's happening.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Ray Anderson. Remote viewing is what I was thinking of. I can never freaking remember that one, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Robert Maxwell has developed a very close relationship with this mobster named Simeon Mogilevich, and he's helped him gain access not only to the U.S. financial system, but also the Israeli financial system by getting him a dual citizen passport, basically, through Israel, where Maxwell had a lot of connections, and it's known now, thanks to the work of Gordon Thomas, that it was very, and also Seymour Hersh, that it was a very close relationship between Maxwell and Israeli intelligence. So he used that to facilitate the entry of this mobster into these different financial systems. And Maxwell actually built an alliance between people like Mogilevich and organized crime groups all over the planet, as far as the Japanese Yakuza, basically. So Maxwell should be known for a lot more than just stealing pension funds. Yes. He should, of course, be known for that, too, because that's terrible. But he should be infamous for a lot more. And so he's making his entry into the U.S. for these reasons, among other things. And he is sort of, when he gets there, he's tapped on the shoulder by these people that are all close to Leslie Wexner. They are members of this group that was established the same year, 91, that's called today the Mega Group. It's Wexner, Bronfman, and this guy named Lawrence Tish, the Crowns, Lester Crown. A lot of them have organized crime ties historically that arguably persist to the present. And Bronfman's important here too, because after BCCI collapse, I mentioned earlier, Edmund Safra sort of seemingly taking over a lot. So one of those Safra banks was Bank of New York, and Edgar Bronfman was intimately involved in that at the time that it sort of became affiliated with Mogilovich financial interests, among other things. And Robert Maxwell starts having a lot of famous New Yorkers on his yacht, on the Lady Ghislaine, a lot of whom are tied to organized crime in some capacity, like Steve Ross, the former head of Time Warner, who built out the company that would eventually become Time Warner out of an organized crime front company, among other things. You have, there's a picture of him also with that guy Ross in Trump that's pretty famous now. And also in that picture is John Tower, who was on the Maxwell and also Israeli intelligence payroll to facilitate their role in the Promise scandal in that picture. And Trump, of course, had ties to, through Roy Cohn Roy Cohn was a guy that straddled political power in Washington with organized crime. He was a mob lawyer, but he was also very close to like the Nixon administration and then later the Reagan administration, very close to Bill Casey, and all sorts of other actors of relevance here. So this is an incredible swamp that Maxwell is swimming in this time, but he's basically sent there for this very powerful banking dynasty, but is also sort of fronting for a lot of these, criminal interests. And one of the people he hires to help guide his entry into the U.S. because he wanted to gain influence with all sorts of powerful politicians and powerful people is Robert Keith Gray, who, as I mentioned earlier, not only had close ties to Bill Casey, Roy Cohn, and all of these guys, but was also a known blackmailer. So that might be where it started. How do you really want to influence politics and powerful figures in New York?
You need intelligence.
You need intelligence, yeah.
You need someone as a front to help gather that intelligence.
Yeah, and Epstein was already well connected to all sorts of networks, kind of like Roy Cohn straddling both worlds to an extent.
When you become a Mossad agent, how does that work?
What do we
know?
mean?
Like,
Okay. And that is where we will stop for part 2. I don't need things to get shut down. We have done enough for today. You know how these intelligence agencies be. So we're going to stop for today. Got a nice solid hour in. I hope you guys have enjoyed this ride along with me. I really appreciate everyone who has taken their time out of their day to listen in on this, hear my thoughts and feelings, speculations, and occasional conspiracies. We'll probably be back tomorrow at 12:30 again. So I'll see you guys then. For those who are catching the replay and you make it this far, please make sure to leave a comment with your thoughts below. And while you're at it, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, ring that notification bell. And until next time, stay positive, stay focused, stay true, and much love.